So please, Dr. Leonardi, please come here to the stage, don't mind. And there's time for discussion. We're perfectly on time. We have 12 minutes left, so I expect quite many questions. Obviously, we have some, but the audience has the priority. We have also one question from the chat, but how many people see? Maybe we first.
Sure, sure. So here's our first question, and this question is for Professor Van Osp. Is the PTV margin between LINAC-based and CyberKnife the same for prostate radiation in the PACE-B trial?
What margin?
Is the PTV margin between the LINAC-based and CyberKnife-based treated the same?
No, they weren't completely the same actually. So the CyberKnife was 5 and 3. It was basically between maximum of 1 for the whole prostate and then 6 millimeters down to 4 millimeters for the LINAC. So you had some flexibility with what you could do with the LINAC. So they weren't quite the same.
Okay. And despite the same margins, the toxicity was different between Cyber and LINAC, yes?
So it's important to say that the conventionally fractionated LINAC is also, the CyberKnife looked very, very similar to the conventionally fractionated LINAC, which was a little bit better. What we didn't, what was odd was that it was different in the SBRT. There are some other things in the SBRT LINAC-based treatment. There were 2 large volume centers that reported quite a lot of higher toxicity. We don't really know why, experienced centers. So I think there were some confounding factors. What was interesting is it was consistent in the acute and late toxicity. So, I think there's something there, but it's hard to distinguish exactly what it is.
Very interesting observation from the study. Okay, any other comments or questions?
So we have another one from the audience, and folks, please feel free just to log in your questions in the chat area, and we could ask them to our speakers. So this question is: does the use of anticoagulant impact the choice of hypofractionation? It's unclear, so I think perhaps we should ask both of our speakers.
I don't think it really does. I mean, there is literature suggesting people on anticoagulants have a higher rate of toxicity. I'm not sure that the particular anticoagulant is relevant.
And Dr. Leonardi, any thoughts on whether anticoagulation matters for? And so this next question, Dr. Leonardi, is for you from the audience. And the question is, in breast cancer, we need long-term data for extreme hypofractionation. And so the question posed is, do we have 10, 15, or 20-year follow-up on data?
For the hypofractionation, yes, the problem is we have just 5 years follow-up of the fast-forward trial. We have, of course, 10 years follow-up in the fast trial. The design was a little different, 1 fraction weekly for 5 weeks. But the point is that for the first trial, the main endpoint was not local control, but was toxicity, was cosmetic outcome. So we lack this very important endpoint for the first trial, which, by the way, had 10 years follow-up. So for a wider implementation of the 5 fraction in 1 week, I think we need time. I think the trial was very outstanding. It will be practice changing, but we'll have to leave time to it.
Dr. Leonardi, so you support the policy by NCCN. They state that it's too early to use it as a routine, while in the UK it is from 15 October 2020, it's a new standard. Yeah, so you are more for cautious approach.
It's true. But we are still struggling on applying moderate hypofractionation for all the situations. So I think that it's a giant leap to go to 5 fraction when we have to settle things with the moderate approximation. So settle first moderate approximation, then move on. But we will arrive at 5 fraction. I am sure about that. So will be the next future.
There's one more question for Dr. Leonardi. Is there any evidence to give 5 gray in 5 fractions as boost after 26 in 5?
No, there is not yet. Just I mentioned the only randomized trial, very small randomized trial from Belgium, 200 patients enrolled. But the end point was very early toxicity, so side effects at 4 weeks after radiotherapy. This is not the point. We know that echotoxicity is lower, but we are very interested to see how late toxicity will go. So no, we don't have data yet, and yeah. It's not safe.
Something, you know, because you try to give 5 fraction short treatment and then you give the same duration, so it's double time, double duration, 5 plus 5 days. So you also lose the benefit of extreme hypofractionation. It becomes almost like moderate 2 weeks treatment. So I think that we don't have evidence, and actually it's not a very good concept also from the overall treatment time aspect. We have one more question to Professor Van As.
So Professor Van As, and this question highlights one of the polling questions that we asked. So this is from one of our colleagues in the United Kingdom. If there's now a trial comparing 2 fractions with 5 fractions for prostate cancer, does this mean that 5 fractions can be considered standard of care?
Good
Question. What is the standard arm?
So yeah, it's a good question. So I don't think you can say 5 fractions is standard of care at the moment. It's, because we haven't presented the results of the Phase B study, which we will present, and I think we are preparing the ground for it being standard of care in the UK. It isn't currently standard of care. So yeah, I should bring Alison up to answer whether or not she should be doing the 2 fraction study at then. But no, I mean, I think it's a really interesting study, but the patients obviously consented to the fact that standard of care is 20 fractions. There's a lot of data, I think, internationally to say 5 fractions is safe. We know it's safe. We've seen the toxicity data. There's a lot of outcome data on non-randomized, but a lot of outcome data on 5 fractions. So I don't think there's any ethical issue really of running a 5 versus 2.
Okay, and I think now it's one of the last questions for Dr. Leonardi. Fast forward, local control curves look like they might be separating in favor 26 in 5. To believe we need 10 or, do you believe, and this is the question, we need 10 or 15-year data before changing practice, means those curves might flip around. Do you agree that this is unlikely? So it is the question about the prevision of how the curves will go. I don't know. You know, you maybe predict.
It's very difficult to say about that.
Yeah, it's a tricky question because actually, you know, sometimes there are some surprise with curves, so we don't know it yet. We wait.
Yeah, I think it's at the moment, for the time being, I think it's, I agree with the Sandhagen panelists, which cannot endorse right now the 5 fraction right away. I think we need time, The trial population was mainly at low risk. Most of these patients can receive a partial breast irradiation. Maybe we have just little more data on partial breast irradiation because more 9,000 patients were enrolled in a randomized study. So we have a lot of patients and also longer follow-up. So maybe if a patient is suitable for partial breast irradiation, I think that she should receive a partial breast irradiation following the principle of the minimum effective treatment. Otherwise, if the patient doesn't meet at least one criteria for the low risk, you can offer 5 fraction. You can discuss with patients about the pro, the contra, the 5 fraction for what we know right now. And for the future, we can't say anything.
Wonderful. So we have time for a final question.
Thank you. Just coming back to the standard of care for prostate cancer. So I'm from a non-academic centre in the UK. We did contribute to the PACE trial, and we've adopted our standard of care, low and intermediate risk. I think there's a huge amount of data, from North America showing safety. And I think the other thing is, if you're looking at low and intermediate risk prostate cancer, the men are highly unlikely to ever die from this disease. So in terms of the risks, they're extremely low, and compared to the CHIP trial, we know that even though there are some slight toxicity concerns, they are slight. So I think in terms of resource implications from a pragmatic perspective, I'm very happy to accept it as a standard of care prematurely, and fully support Alison's trial. So I've got no problem with it whatsoever. So I think we should be pushing it, and it's ultimately going to happen. I hope I'm not wrong, because I look very silly otherwise. So I'm happy to stand up and make that point.
Same time, it won't be the first time it looks silly, but that's
Thank you.
On behalf of Accuray, we'd love to have just a moment of a round of applause for our co-chair, for our speakers. Of course, we would also like to thank you for your attendance and look forward to further conversations. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a nice afternoon.
Yeah. Thank you.